Watch this video because this way you will know 5 rules of inuring your dog to mechanics. But first, there is a summary of the previous series. Proper use of the leash changes the dog's behavior. If you apply the leash in training properly, your dog will learn to be attentive to the slightest pull of the leash. This way you won't have to pay a lot of efforts taking your pet for a walk. The dog is able to understand not only strong jerks and other coercion, but also the slightest movements of the leash which you don't realize, in which your intentions and desires are usually expressed. When training a dog, it is important not to rush to extremes. Do not expose the dog to senseless punishment if it does not obey you, but also don't aimlessly repeat a mantra that the dog owes you nothing. The master of the dog must train and teach it properly. As a result of proper teaching and training, the dog must obey the man. Let us proceed to the main part of the film. I'm going to tell you about 5 rules that will be useful if you want to use mechanical stimuli in order to make the dog more manageable and comfortable for yourself. These 5 rules will help you increase your pet's discipline, and at the same time, by following these rules, you will be able to work without too much stress for the dog, thus you will keep its trust and love. Now, in turns, let's consider these 5 rules of using mechanical stimuli in training. The very first rule. At the initial phase of training, it's necessary to use synchronization of the positive and negative exposure. Now let's consider this in more detail. How to help your dog to understand the impact of a leash or other mechanics in your communicating with it properly. There are times when the dog doesn't respond to the weak jerk, but when it feels a strong spurt, its response is opposition. First of all, make this jerk a signal that now you're going to give it some food. Then, using a familiar and understandable exercise for the dog by way of forcing influence, use food and jerk of a leash. When you feel that the dog doesn't resist but complies with the jerk of a leash, use this spurt in other exercises. Give your dog a clue what it should do in response to a spurt by a piece of food. Help your dog choose not resistance but subordination to the mechanical stimuli, simultaneously using mechanics and feed. And now we see a more advanced version. First, the dog conforming to the spurt does an exercise and pull, goes close by, and only then food comes into sight. Now moving on to the second rule. Use mechanics not to teach it some skills, but to instill stability and reliability of running commands. Very often, dog masters refuse to use coercion in training because they are afraid of losing trust and love of their dog. This won't happen if you use mechanics not for training but to instill stability and reliability of running commands. It is possible to train the dog using only mechanics. This way, you won't be using food, but it's more difficult and there is no need to do it. First, teach your dog to go close by using food or a toy. Only after that, require fail-safe execution of the command heel using coercion. Let's repeat the second rule of using mechanical stimuli during training one more time. The dog, which is applied disciplining mechanical stimuli, should be previously trained to do this exercise. Once you've trained your dog to go close by, either with the help of a toy or food, and agreed with it that you have the right to use the jerk, it's time for disciplinary training. Now, moving on to the third rule. The strength of the mechanical stimuli should force the dog to the behavior you want to receive as a result of teaching and training. The impact must be of a certain strength so that it's able to cause the behavior that we require from the dog. Put the dog in a certain framework for it to behave the way you want. Once the dog understands you and starts doing what you want from it, start reducing the impact force. Do it slowly. Do not rush and do not lower the impact force very sharp. You have to convince the dog that there is no difference between strong and weak jerk of the leash. If you use weak jerks of a leash at the stage of disciplinary training, the dog will get used to them, and later it will simply ignore even powerful jerks. None of us wants to torment his tailed friend using strong jerks of a leash. That is why from the very beginning of disciplinary training, a jerk must be of sufficient strength. Remember how the dog is accustomed to strokes of a stack during protection. At first a figurant hits at the dog, then he hits at it and pets it, then he slaps it a little, and ultimately when the dog is beaten by a stack, it bites the sleeve happily. Why is this happening? Because the dog gets used to the strokes by a stack. If you taught your dog not to be afraid of swings and strokes during protection, then it's great. And if you teach your dog to ignore your jerks by the leash, it is not so good. That is why the force of the impact should cause the behavior we need to get as a result of training. To make the situation maximally vivid and clear to the dog, it's indispensable to follow the fourth rule. Initial training of a dog the command heel should go by short cycles. Train the dog according to the following scheme: command, impact, behavior, reward. This cycle must be very concise and short. This scheme should go to the short-term memory of the dog. At the time when the dog gets a reward, still it has to remember that there was a command, an impact, it did something, and finally now it gets the treat. The dog should understand that commands predict and impact. Correct behavior allows to avoid impact and get a reward. If there is no such short and vivid cycle, then the dog gets stressed and trained very bad. Very often training the dog the command heel starts with a long walking on the square. Such stupid walking on the square within 10-15 minutes is the best way to discourage your dog's interest in training. Let's repeat the fourth rule once again. In order not to form dogs' aversion to training at the initial stage, we have to work using maximally short cycles. Increase of work duration up to the moment of getting a reward should proceed gradually. Moving on to the fifth rule. Mechanical stimuli must necessarily be compensated. The greater the load on the dog, the more it has to be positively deloaded by the reward. First, you pay a lot and often to your dog for a very small and simple work. When your dog gets used to these exercises and considers them simple and easy, only then you can gradually reduce its salary and increase the amount of work. Make sure that the dog doesn't suspect anything, as well as doesn't get upset that now it has to work harder and it gets less salary. It is important to select your dog for deload that particular encouragement which will be in your dog's favor, and the one which will indeed and not in name help to shift attention and distress. Look for what your dog likes and use it in your work. For some dogs, by way of deload and encouragement, you can use the search of a toy. Searching for a dog is like meditation for a person. Full switching and distress, but of course in reasonable doses. So, let's repeat the fifth rule once again. The harder you use sticks, the sweeter must be the carrot after the dog obeys the command. In general, to deload the dog by way of the summarizing exercises more often than not distant call-up is used, when the assistant trainer holds the dog while the master calls it from a large distance. In conclusion, let me list these 5 rules again. First, simultaneous use of carrot and sticks approach. Second, preliminary positive training. Third, the impact should entail desired response. Fourth, short cycle that's clear to the dog. Fifth, the carrot should compensate sticks. If you liked our video, subscribe to our channel for free and like us.